Samuel, the last judge of Israel and one of its greatest prophets, was born to Hannah and Elkanah in the hill country of Ephraim. His mother, unable to bear children for many years, fervently prayed to the Lord for a son, vowing that if he granted her request, she would dedicate the child to his service. Hannah's barrenness brought her deep sorrow, and she was often taunted by her husband's other wife, Peninnah, who had children of her own. Despite the ridicule and heartache, Hannah never lost faith. She would visit the Tabernacle at Shiloh year after year, pouring out her soul before the Lord. One particular year, during one of these pilgrimages, she stood before the Tabernacle, tears streaming down her face, her lips moving silently in desperate prayer. She promised God that if he granted her a son, she would dedicate him to his service for his entire life, never allowing a razor to touch his head as a sign of his consecration. Hannah's pain was not just physical, but deeply emotional and spiritual. She felt an aching void, one that no worldly comfort could fill. Each time she saw mothers cradling their infants or young children laughing in the streets, her heart tightened with longing. But despite her sorrow, Hannah never turned to bitterness. Instead, she channeled her pain into prayer, believing that God, in his infinite mercy, would one day grant her the desire of her heart. Her faith was unwavering, and her persistence in prayer set her apart as a woman of deep spiritual devotion. On one such visit to the Tabernacle at Shiloh, Hannah found herself completely overwhelmed. She could no longer contain the emotions surging through her, and she collapsed before the altar, her body shaking as she wept. Her lips moved in silent petition, uttering words only her heart could understand. Her desperate, wordless cries caught the attention of Eli, the high priest, who watched her intently. Mistaking her silent prayers for drunkenness, he reprimanded her, demanding that she put away her wine. With a trembling voice, Hannah quickly explained that she was not intoxicated, but was pouring out her soul before the Lord. She revealed her anguish, her longing, and the promise she had made to dedicate her child to God should he grant her one. Eli, now recognizing her sincerity, softened his tone. He blessed her, saying, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." These words, spoken with divine authority, gave Hannah a renewed sense of hope and peace. True to his mercy, God remembered Hannah, and in due time, she conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, meaning God has heard, as a testament to the answered prayer that had changed her life. The moment she held Samuel in her arms, she knew he was a child of divine purpose. Every sleepless night and every painful prayer had led to this miraculous moment, and her gratitude knew no bounds. Hannah cherished every moment with Samuel, watching as he grew from an infant into a lively young boy. But as he thrived under her care, the day loomed when she would have to fulfill her vow to the Lord. When Samuel was weaned, she made the difficult yet joyous journey back to Shiloh to present her beloved child before Eli. With unwavering faith, she reminded Eli of her promise and handed over her son to be raised in the tabernacle, dedicating him to the service of the Lord. As she placed Samuel in Eli's care, Hannah did not weep in sorrow, but instead lifted her voice in praise. She sang a prayer of thanksgiving and exaltation, a song that echoed through generations as a hymn of God's justice and faithfulness. Her prayer celebrated the Lord's ability to lift the humble and bring down the proud, to strengthen the weak and humble the mighty. She understood that Samuel was not just a gift to her, but a vessel for God's purpose in Israel. Though she left her son in the care of Eli at the tabernacle, she continued to visit him yearly, bringing him a small robe she had made with her own hands. Each stitch woven into the fabric was a symbol of her love and devotion, a tangible reminder that though Samuel was dedicated to God, he would always have a mother who loved and prayed for him. Her visits were moments of joy, each one reinforcing her faith that Samuel was exactly where he was meant to be. Hannah's story is a powerful testament to the strength of faith, perseverance, and surrender. Her ability to trust in God's plan, even when it meant giving up what she had long desired, remains one of the most profound examples of faith in the Bible. Samuel's birth was not just the fulfillment of Hannah's personal longing, but a part of a much greater divine narrative, one that would shape the destiny of Israel through the leadership and guidance of her son. The moment Samuel stepped into the sacred grounds of the Tabernacle, his life changed forever. Unlike other children, he would not grow up in the comfort of his parents' home, but in the house of the Lord, surrounded by priests, offerings, and the daily rituals of worship. His young mind was filled with wonder as he watched the flickering flames of the golden lampstand and smelled the burning incense that filled the sacred space. Eli, now aged and weary, took Samuel under his wing, guiding him through the sacred duties of temple service. Samuel's days were filled with tasks that, while small at first, were crucial in shaping his character. He cleaned the temple, prepared the oil for the lamps, and assisted the priests with various duties. Unlike Eli's own sons, who abused their positions of power, Samuel treated every task with reverence. He learned the importance of sacrifice, the weight of divine law, and the solemnity of prayer. He watched the people of Israel come with their offerings, some weeping in repentance, others rejoicing in gratitude. Each encounter strengthened his understanding of his calling. Hannah's yearly visits were moments of comfort and joy for Samuel. Each time she arrived, she would embrace him, marveling at how much he had grown. She would bring him a new robe, woven with care, each stitch representing her love and prayers. Though she could not raise him as a typical mother would, her influence on his life was undeniable. The knowledge that he was a child born from faith and a promise shaped Samuel's understanding of God's hand in his destiny. While Samuel grew in wisdom and devotion, he could not ignore the corruption within the priesthood. Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, abused their positions, stealing from the offerings meant for the Lord and engaging in sinful behavior. The people of Israel murmured against them, but Eli, though aware of their wickedness, failed to take decisive action. Samuel, young as he was, could not understand why men who were supposed to serve God could act in such ways. He resolved in his heart to be different, to be faithful where others had failed. One night, as Samuel lay sleeping near the Ark of the Covenant, a voice called his name. Startled, he rose and ran to Eli, assuming it was the old priest calling him. But Eli, confused, sent him back to bed. Again the voice called, and again Samuel ran to Eli. The third time it happened, Eli understood what was occurring. "Go back and lie down," he instructed Samuel. "If he calls you again, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" With his heart pounding, Samuel returned to his bed. When the voice called again, he did as Eli had instructed. "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening," he whispered into the stillness of the night. At that moment, God spoke to Samuel for the first time, revealing a message of judgment against Eli's house. Though young, Samuel had been chosen to be God's prophet. From that night forward, Samuel's life was never the same. He carried the weight of divine revelation, his innocence replaced with the knowledge that he had been set apart for a great purpose. The Lord continued to speak to him, and as he grew, his reputation as a prophet spread throughout Israel. He became known as a man of integrity, one whose words never fell to the ground. Samuel's dedication to the Lord was not merely a consequence of his mother's vow, but a reflection of his own heart's longing to serve. He embraced his calling, growing in faith, wisdom, and leadership. The child who had been given to God before he was even born had now become the spiritual leader of a nation, guiding Israel through one of its most crucial transitions in history. Samuel's formative years at the Tabernacle were filled with devotion, learning, and a growing awareness of God's presence. As a young boy, he awoke each morning to the scent of burning incense and the solemn chants of the priests offering their daily sacrifices. His duties, though simple at first, laid the foundation for his character. He learned to prepare the sacred oils, ensure the lamps remained burning, and keep the temple clean, performing each task with a sense of deep reverence. Samuel did not view his work as mere chores, but as acts of worship. Under the watchful eye of Eli, Samuel was immersed in the scriptures and the traditions of Israel. He memorized the sacred laws given to Moses and listened to the oral traditions that recounted the mighty works of God. The more he learned, the more he desired to know, and Eli recognized in him a thirst for spiritual wisdom that was uncommon for one so young. Unlike Eli's own sons, Hophni and Phinehas, Samuel showed unwavering respect for God's commandments. Where they sought personal gain and power, he sought holiness and truth. The corruption of the priesthood was not hidden from Samuel's eyes. He saw the people of Israel approach the altar with reverence, only to have their offerings tainted by the greed and misconduct of the priests. Hophni and Phinehas took what was not theirs, demanding the best portions of the sacrifices meant for God. The people whispered about their sins, and some even began to lose faith in the temple's holiness. Samuel observed Eli's reluctance to discipline his sons, his hesitance to correct the growing evil in his own house. Though Samuel was young, he understood that leadership required courage, and he vowed to be different when his time came. Despite the darkness that loomed over the priesthood, Samuel found solace in his relationship with God. The tabernacle to him was more than a dwelling for sacred relics. It was the very house of God, where he felt closest to the divine. He spent long hours in prayer, seeking the Lord's guidance and pouring out his heart in childlike faith. Even when he did not understand all that he heard, he listened intently, trusting that God's ways would be revealed in time. Unlike those before him who had sought power and status, Samuel remained humble, always listening, always seeking God's guidance. As Samuel grew, his reputation spread throughout Israel. The voice of the Lord continued to guide him, and his influence extended beyond the tabernacle walls. He became a mediator for the people, a voice of truth in an era of moral decline. He reminded the Israelites of their covenant with God, urging them to turn away from idolatry and return to righteousness. His presence alone brought reassurance to the faithful, for they knew that God was with him. Samuel's childhood was not one of ease, nor was it filled with the carefree pleasures other children enjoyed. Yet, it was a childhood of divine purpose, one that shaped him into the leader Israel would soon need. Through discipline, hardship, and unwavering devotion, Samuel transformed from a humble boy serving in the temple to a mighty prophet and judge of Israel, destined to lead the nation through one of its most pivotal transitions in history. As Samuel entered adulthood, his role as a prophet and judge of Israel became more pronounced. The spiritual decay that had plagued Israel for years had left the people vulnerable to external threats and internal strife. With Eli and his corrupt sons now gone, Samuel stepped into the role of leadership, not as a king, but as a divinely appointed prophet and judge, a unique position that allowed him to guide Israel both spiritually and judicially. Unlike the rulers of other nations, Samuel's authority was not based on military might or royal lineage, but on his unwavering connection to God and his ability to communicate divine will. Samuel's first major act as a leader was to call the people of Israel to repentance. The Israelites had long fallen into idolatry, worshipping the gods of the surrounding nations, including Baal and Ashtoreth. Samuel recognized that in order for Israel to experience true restoration and divine favor, they had to return wholeheartedly to the Lord. Standing before the assembly at Mizpah, he urged them to put away their false gods and commit themselves fully to Yahweh. The people responded with sincerity, fasting and confessing their sins before the Lord. This moment of national repentance marked the beginning of Samuel's spiritual revival in Israel. Soon after, the Philistines, Israel's longtime enemy, sought to take advantage of the gathering at Mizpah, seeing it as an opportunity to attack. However, Samuel did not rely on military strength alone. Instead, he turned to God in prayer. As he offered a burnt sacrifice, he cried out to the Lord for deliverance. In response, God sent a mighty thunderstorm that threw the Philistines into chaos, allowing the Israelites to defeat them decisively. This victory was not just a military triumph, but a spiritual one, demonstrating that Israel's power lay not in their own strength, but in their reliance on God. In commemoration, Samuel set up a stone and named it Ebenezer, meaning, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." This stone served as a lasting reminder of God's faithfulness. For many years, Samuel continued to lead Israel as a judge. He traveled from city to city, settling disputes and ensuring that justice was upheld according to God's law. Unlike Eli's sons, who had exploited their positions for personal gain, Samuel remained just and impartial. His leadership brought a period of stability and peace to Israel, something the nation had not known for generations. However, as he grew older, the people of Israel began to clamor for a change in leadership. They saw the nations around them ruled by kings and desired the same for themselves. The idea of a monarchy seemed appealing to them, offering a sense of security and power that a judge and prophet could not. Samuel was deeply grieved by their request. He saw it not merely as a rejection of himself, but as a rejection of God's kingship over Israel. Seeking the Lord's guidance, Samuel was told to heed the people's request, but to warn them of the consequences. Standing before the elders of Israel, he outlined the realities of monarchy. A king would take their sons for his armies, their daughters for his service, their land for his own purposes, and impose heavy burdens upon them. Yet, despite these warnings, the people remained resolute in their demand for a king. Reluctantly, Samuel anointed Saul from the tribe of Benjamin as Israel's first king. Initially, Saul showed promise. He was humble, charismatic, and victorious in battle. Saul's rise to power was marked by promise, divine selection, and initial success. When Samuel anointed him as Israel's first king, Saul was a man of great stature, standing head and shoulders above others. His physical presence alone inspired confidence in the people. At first, Saul seemed humble, even reluctant to accept kingship. He hid among the baggage when Samuel sought to present him to Israel. However, once confirmed as king, Saul swiftly proved his capability by leading Israel to victories over their enemies, including the Ammonites, uniting the tribes in military triumph. His early reign was filled with promise, and the people rejoiced in having a strong leader. However, Saul's reign took a dark turn as his character flaws became evident. One of his first major failures was his impatience at Gilgal. Before a battle against the Philistines, Samuel instructed Saul to wait for his arrival to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. Fearful as his soldiers began to scatter and desperate for divine favor, Saul took it upon himself to perform the offering, despite not being a priest. When Samuel arrived and discovered what Saul had done, he was deeply troubled. "You have acted foolishly," Samuel told him. "You have not kept the command of the Lord your God." As a result, Samuel declared that Saul's dynasty would not endure, for God sought a man after his own heart. Though this was a stern warning, Saul did not change his ways. God then sent Samuel to Bethlehem to anoint a new king. Arriving at the house of Jesse, Samuel was presented with Jesse's sons, strong and impressive in appearance. However, God reminded Samuel that he does not judge by outward appearances, but looks at the heart. One by one, Jesse's sons passed before Samuel, yet none were chosen. Finally, Jesse's youngest son, David, was summoned from the fields, where he had been tending sheep. To the surprise of everyone, God chose David, a humble shepherd, to be the future king of Israel. Though Samuel anointed David, he did not immediately assume the throne. Instead, he spent years growing into his role, facing trials, persecution from Saul, and developing a deep relationship with God. Samuel continued to guide him, offering wisdom and prophetic insight. Despite having anointed David, Samuel still had to deal with Saul. His disobedience continued when God commanded him to destroy the Amalekites completely, every man, woman, child, and livestock. Instead, Saul spared King Agag and the best of the livestock, claiming they were intended as sacrifices. When Samuel confronted him, Saul initially denied wrongdoing, attempting to justify his partial obedience. But partial obedience was still disobedience in God's eyes. Samuel's response was piercing. To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. With these words, Samuel announced that God had rejected Saul as king. In a desperate moment, Saul grabbed Samuel's robe, tearing it, to which Samuel solemnly replied, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you." From that point on, Saul's downfall accelerated. God's spirit departed from him, and he was tormented by a distressing spirit. His once bold leadership was replaced by paranoia and instability. As his mental and emotional state deteriorated, so did his relationships. Though Saul would continue to reign for some time, his fate was sealed, and his downfall was inevitable. Samuel spent his final years observing the unraveling of Saul's kingship and the quiet rise of David. Though his role as judge had come to an end, his prophetic work continued. He had ushered Israel through one of its most significant transitions, from a theocracy to a monarchy, ensuring that God's will remained central despite the people's demands. Even as he aged, Samuel remained a steadfast servant of the Lord, ensuring that Israel stayed on the path of righteousness. When Samuel passed away, the entire nation mourned. He had been more than just a judge or a prophet. He had been a guiding light in Israel's history. His legacy endured long after his death, as he was remembered as a man of unwavering faith, integrity, and devotion to God. His influence shaped the course of Israel's destiny, from the transition of judgeship to monarchy, and his role in anointing both Saul and David set the stage for Israel's greatest king. Samuel's story stands as a testament to the power of faith, obedience, and the importance of seeking God's will above all else. His life reminds us that true leadership is not about personal ambition or power, but about serving others with humility and remaining faithful to the divine call. As Saul's reign descended into paranoia and insecurity, he became suspicious of those around him, particularly David, the young shepherd who had slain Goliath and won the admiration of the people. The cheers of the people. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands, stoked his jealousy into rage. What began as admiration for David turned into relentless obsession. Saul's pursuit of David consumed his reign. Instead of focusing on ruling wisely or protecting Israel, he devoted his efforts to hunting down the one he perceived as a threat. David, though innocent, became a fugitive, fleeing from Saul's relentless pursuit. Despite multiple opportunities to kill Saul, David refrained, refusing to harm the Lord's anointed. This contrast between Saul's paranoia and David's restraint only further highlighted the king's spiraling descent. During his final years, Saul's desperation reached its peak. Without God's guidance and estranged from Samuel, who had distanced himself, Saul sought counsel from a medium at Endor, an act explicitly forbidden by God. Disguising himself, he asked the medium to summon the spirit of Samuel. To his horror, the spirit of the prophet appeared and reiterated his grim fate. The kingdom had been torn from him, and he and his sons would die in battle against the Philistines. Saul's worst fears were confirmed, and he left the encounter in despair, knowing his end was near. The prophecy was fulfilled the next day on the battlefield. Facing overwhelming Philistine forces, Saul's army was slaughtered. His sons, including Jonathan, fell in battle, and Saul, gravely wounded, chose to take his own life rather than be captured and humiliated by the enemy. His reign, once filled with promise, ended in tragedy and dishonor. Saul's rise and fall serve as a cautionary tale of how disobedience, pride, and fear can unravel even the most promising of leaders. His story stands in stark contrast to David, the king who would succeed him, one who, though flawed, sought after God's heart. Saul's downfall was not merely about political failure, but spiritual decline. He started with God's favor but ended in despair, cut off from divine guidance. His tragic end reminds us that true success is not measured by outward stature or strength, but by obedience and faithfulness to God.